But what is so great about MCRC and any rehab center where all the disciplines are there is that you might think one thing like speech,
Mhm.
but then as speech begins to see them and gets to know the child, they might think, wow, I think a lot of the speech could be affected by sensory problems. And I really would like to pull OT in here to do a screen. And so I think that's the beauty of having a facility where everything is under one roof, to be able to help each other out that way. You don't always uncover it the first visit.
Hi, my name is Jessica McCoy, and I'm your host here at Raising Midland, a podcast for parents of the Permian. Today, I am here with Executive Director of Midland Children's Rehab Center, Kristal Kidd. Help me introduce my friend, Kristal. Hey, Kristal.
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks
I know
so much for having us.
there's not really like a smooth way to go into that, but I try. Okay, great. So tell me a little bit about yourself. You're the executive director of probably one of the most well-known organizations in Midland. And I'm not putting anybody else down. I'm just saying it's a very well-known organization here in Midland. So explain to me, how did you end up in West Texas? Are you from here?
I actually grew up in Odessa.
Okay.
Went to Texas Tech for my undergrad, went to physical therapy school in El Paso at UTEP.
Nice.
And my husband was finishing up school at Texas Tech, and we did not want to come back to West Texas. And when he graduated in 2000 with an accounting degree, it was really hard to find jobs then. And the one job that was available, kind of based on his accounting work, was a controller position at Saturn dealership in Midland. And I mean, we drug our feet for weeks, like trying to look for other things. And then we had to go where the job was because we had just had a baby. So that's what brought us to Midland.
That's so cool. How many children do you have?
We have 3.
Oh, wow.
22 to 19. So
you have
they're all out
you
of
have
the
doctor of
house.
physical therapy?
No, when I graduated, it was a master's degree.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'm probably one of the few that like that was probably one of the last classes where it was a master's degree before they changed it to doctorate.
One of my best friends, Kinsey Scoville, she's a doctor of physical therapy for the Colts.
Yeah. Oh,
And
so fun.
So I can understand you were saying your progression.
Yeah.
It would technically be a doctor of physical
Right.
therapy. She was explaining to me how difficult it is to even get in the field of physical therapy back when she started. But at that level, especially,
Yes.
she's one of the only few, and Kinsey, if she's listening to this, she'll probably correct me. I know at her graduating class, there were only 5 women in the NFL as physical therapists
I am not surprised.
because of the locker room and all
Wow.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But so I can imagine that you've seen quite a lot within your career. Did you
Right.
start off in like private practice or a
I
hospital
did.
setting?
I worked in a hospital setting that was also outpatient pediatrics. So my last rotation in physical therapy school was in Lubbock for University Medical Center, and they had a last minute opening in pediatrics. I was supposed to go to adult neuro. That was like my passion. That was my favorite. And it got canceled last minute. And so my clinical coordinator called me and she said, Kristal, if you want to be in Lubbock with your husband, you've got to take a pediatric clinical. And I
If
was
you want to
like,
be in the same
yes,
community as your husband,
yes.
absolutely, I'll take
And I
it.
was like, that was not in my plan. Like, I don't know if I can do that. And I loved pediatrics is very much neuro. So the fact that I liked neuro was helpful. But honestly, when I was in school, it seemed a little sad.
Wow.
And so I was like, wow. And it also, I would have been graduating in 2000. There was a whole Medicare Reform Act that happened that year. So it was hard to get jobs for therapists. That's whenever insurance companies kind of started cracking down on, if this is a total knee replacement, you make X amount of money. And for those that need more days in the hospital, your rehab departments are just kind of eating that cost. So they were downsizing therapy departments. And so she was like, Kristal, what if the only job open is a job in pediatrics? It would give you experience. And so I took her advice, and one weekend I was hooked.
You're like, I'm done.
I loved
This is it.
pediatrics. And she was right. The one job that was open in Lubbock that was even willing to look at a new grad was a job in peds. And the fact that I had just done pediatrics was a huge open door for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's get into that. I don't know anything about medical care, to be honest with you. I've had the opportunity to interview Stephen Bowerman, the president of the hospital, and Russell Myers, the former president of the hospital, but now Midland Memorial Foundation. So tell me about that. Like, just from the medical side, when you say pediatrics is neuro,
Mhm.
explain to me what that is. Because in my head, as somebody who knows nothing, I'm thinking, okay, so are we talking about a lot of the interventions that physical therapists can do with pediatrics is because of neurological injuries or what?
Yeah, a lot of the diagnoses that you will see a child for have like a neurologic component. So, cerebral palsy is there was some sort of lack of oxygen to the brain during development, maybe at birth or shortly after birth.
Mhm,
And so the brain is involved there. All of like the chromosomal abnormalities
mhm.
that end up being a pediatric diagnosis, those are all considered like neuro involvement.
Wow.
And it's like adults, just like some adults have strokes or have Parkinson's disease, and those diagnoses are more brain component as opposed to just which affects muscles and tissues as opposed to just like a broken arm or a torn ligament. And pediatrics has that too, but the
Mhm.
bulk of our diagnoses are more those involved neurologic cases.
Wow. So, like, let's
Yeah.
get into that. In my head, I'm thinking that's a Pandora's box because then there's so many things because the brain truly is the operating system for everything.
Right.
You know, you have your autonomic system and where basically it tells you when to breathe and you don't even have to
Right.
think about it. Right. So I can imagine that that really spills into other aspects of a child's life. It might not be necessarily physical therapy that's needed for, let's say, a child who has cerebral palsy, but you might also need speech therapy because that's also neurologically involved. So,
You
what kind of services do you guys offer for your patients?
Yeah, you're exactly right. MCRC is a total rehab facility. So we offer PT, OT, speech. We also have a little addition of dyslexia
Mhm.
tutoring and a therapeutic dance program and an equine program, which supports our therapy services. But you're right. The majority of the kids that come to us with that developmental diagnosis or that neurodiagnosis probably isn't just needing physical therapy because the same muscles that are tight in their legs or their trunk because there was a little bit of a brain lack of oxygen or damage, it's causing them to present a certain way in their legs, also is causing muscles to be tight in their mouth
Mhm.
or for breathing. And so what a therapist a long time ago that I worked with says, what you see at the hip you'll see at the lip. And it's so
Ooh,
true with those neuro kids.
that is
It's
very
so true.
interesting.
Yeah, the
So,
muscle tone is not just in one area of the body most often. It's
that
affected
is
everywhere.
you just really I don't know, validated a lot of things for me right now because as a swim coach, you know, from a very high level, I can't get into the nitty-gritty because I don't have the qualifications, but I see that as a swim coach.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of children who have physical differences, emotional or cognitive differences as well. And you can really see so many things that seem to be linked, but they're not
Sure.
related. So I can understand. It seems like your goal as an organization really is to approach it from an entire therapeutic model. You're not just looking at one or two things that, you're not trying to just fix a speech problem.
Yeah.
You're not just trying to check the box. This child has done, 100 hours of speech therapy and they can say X, Y, and Z. It doesn't seem like that's what that's what not what your goal is. Your goal
Right.
is to really approach the
The
whole
whole
child. So
child.
can you explain to me because I know on your website you use a particular phrase of like a therapeutic model.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Can you explain what that is?
Absolutely. So we're therapeutic intervention.
Mm,
And so what that means is it's like a systematic, very structured, intentional process of looking at a human. And in our case, it's little humans, it's children. And so we're looking at them with a medical eye and doing evaluations, and we're identifying problems along with like what the family tells us and what we're seeing, and with those problems, we're creating a plan for what our treatment is. So whether it's physical therapy, occupational therapy, or speech therapy, we're all doing that with the eyes that we were trained to do.
wow.
And so based on what their problems are, we know like what best practice is for that problem. So if it's someone with cerebral palsy who has very tight leg muscles and they scissor when they walk, I know that one of the problems is they can't separate their legs to walk well. And so I need to work on range of motion and I need to work on strengthening the muscles that are weak because on the opposite of what's tight is usually weakness. And
Oh,
so,
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
That's
So
interesting.
if one muscle group is tight, the opposing muscle group is going to be over lengthened and weak.
So it's overcompensating. So like for a child who may have cerebral palsy, maybe their core muscles may be struck or maybe helping them walk,
Yeah.
whereas their legs should be walking
Yeah.
and using those
Yeah.
muscle groups.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand from like a non medical perspective. That is very interesting. So when you say neuro, what other types of children and differences are you serving? I mean, you said dyslexia. So can you talk to us about that? Like, because in my head, I don't know anything about speech, but I'm assuming that you might uncover more things in regards to providing the therapies. Like, for instance, you were just saying with your cerebral palsy patients, you may start to notice, okay, well, if they're not exercising or using their core muscles, we need to strengthen those. But we also
Mhm.
need to maybe think about other parts of the brain that could also, if we advance those, like through speech therapy, it can also help create new neural connections to help them with their speech. How do you I guess what I'm trying to say is how do you approach things within your intervention care as they come up? Is it something that you work with pediatricians on? I mean, I feel like that's such a like a sensitive thing. It's such a wonderful thing that you approach therapy in this way of seeing the whole child, but
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you approach those sensitive
Yeah.
subjects?
Well, I mean, best practice would be that a parent is going to their pediatrician
Mhm,
who knows their child pretty well and
mhm,
is talking about concerns. And then the pediatrician offers the suggestions of, wow, I think that really sounds like we could benefit from physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech therapy.
mhm,
That isn't the way that it always happens.
mhm,
Sometimes kids come to us because parents are concerned
mhm,
and we encourage them to go get the doctor's prescription and that's really always our starting point. But what is so great about MCRC and any rehab center where all the disciplines are there is that you might think one thing like speech,
mhm,
but then as speech begins to see them and gets to know the child, they might think, wow, I think a lot of the speech could be affected by sensory problems. And I really would like
mhm,
to pull OT in here to do a screen. Or another common thing is sometimes our occupational therapists will be seeing a child for some sensory problems
mhm,
and they happen to be toe walkers, which is kind of common for
mhm,
kids who are sensory seeking. And
mhm.
so they might pull physical therapy in and say, hey, can you look at their range of motion? Like, do they have the range of motion to be able to walk on their heels? And so I think that's the beauty of having a facility where everything is under one roof to be able to help each other out that way. You
'Cause
don't always uncover it the first visit.
yeah, and I feel like that's so difficult. I know that there's so many parents that I just speak to on the daily that they're already mom taxi or dad taxi where they're just like taking kids everywhere. And as you know, the majority of Midlanders have a dual working home, which
Mhm.
means mom and dad do not have the time to be able to take their children to and from appointments. So
Right,
having everything in house can be really beneficial
right.
for patients. So how does like somebody get in contact with you? Like how is the whole process started?
Okay.
Do they go to their pediatrician
Yeah,
or
yeah, that's the most common.
okay.
Like I said, if they called us without going to the pediatrician first, we would ask them to go to their doctor and get a doctor's prescription. We have all of our patient, like our parent information is posted online.
Mhm.
So they can go to our website, they can print the parent packet, and it's pretty intensive. It's a whole lot of questions. And once we get the parent packet back and a prescription for whatever therapy the doctor's recommending, then we put them on a wait list. We keep 30 is our max for our all three of our wait lists. Right now, they're all open. And the reason that we cap our wait list at 30 is because what we were finding was that we at times had 60, 70, 80 people on a wait list. And we knew that in a given year, we weren't going to make it through that list. And so we felt like if we capped it and a family didn't like accept that, okay, I'm gonna get in soon, that they would keep trying to call other
Oh, no.
places. And
Yeah.
so when they get referred to us, if we can't put them on our list, we immediately text them a link that has all of the different facilities that are local
That's
that they can.
amazing.
Yes, because early intervention is best. It doesn't have to
Okay,
be
let's
at
talk about that.
MCRC.
Okay,
Okay.
so because
Okay.
I am fascinated with the idea of early intervention, and there's actually a whole research study. I'm sure you already know about it, so I'm not trying to like
No,
explain
no, no,
something
no.
that you already know.
I'm nerdy like that
Okay,
too.
I love
I
it.
love to
I
learn
think
new
the
stuff.
more when you get your like master's degree, I'm not into like educational eliteness, but I
Yeah.
do feel like when you get your master's, you start to realize there's so much like you learn that you don't know anything. So like
Very true.
yeah, so I try to I feel like the more education you have, the more you realize I don't really know a
Yeah.
lot, so you have to continuously research.
True.
So, one of the most interesting things that I'm interested in currently right now in regards to pediatric development is the research that's being done with Harvard and the
Okay.
Institute of the Developing Child,
Okay.
as well as the Royal Center for Early Childhood Education,
Okay.
Center,
Okay.
Center. They spell center weird.
Yeah.
Um, and basically, these two organizations, Harvard is trying to understand what are the main variables that can impact a child's development. And one of the things that they talk about is access to pediatric care.
Okay.
Have it be speech therapy, have it be, Steve Bowerman and I were talking about, the breastfeeding groups that they
Mhm.
have, even. I mean, it starts so early and you
Right.
really need the medical support from the very beginning.
Right.
And you also need support throughout that parent and child's development for the
Yeah.
first 5 years of life, because the Royal Center for Early Childhood Education or center, they talk about the first 5 years is the most impactful season in a child's life in regards to their brain development, because they make so many neural connections
Right.
within the first 5 years that it can actually impact your child permanently.
Right.
So let's pretend that I have a child who has a developmental difference. What would be the trajectory of my life as a parent in my child's life if I chose or couldn't have access to early childhood interventions such as physical therapy
Yeah.
or OT? What
Yeah.
would be the impact of that?
I think that it changes how that parent can function in our community. I think that early intervention feeds to building strong communities because you're figuring out problems sooner. You're learning about your child sooner. You're intervening sooner. In not all cases is early intervention mean that one day you'll be done. Like
Yeah.
in many instances, there's diagnoses where early intervention still means therapy, perhaps year after year, or when a growth spurt, comes on. But it does mean that whenever you start sooner, you're finding answers about your child sooner. You're getting support sooner. You're able to function within your world because it's not just the child, but it's a mom and dad, like you mentioned, that have jobs. And so I think that it makes our community stronger when we have an opportunity to improve developmental outcomes
Mhm.
because some of our kiddos, when we early intervene, they are going to be discharged and they're going to get caught up to what age appropriate level they are, and so that's an improvement in their developmental outcome. If we can decrease the long-term effects of having a child with a disability that
Mhm.
needs some intervention, if we can decrease those long-term effects, then that's better for our community. That's
Mhm.
mom and dad able to make it you stay at their job longer and not have to take as many appointments out. When we can support our community's needs and support these families by, helping them get to appointments. There's so many services in our community that serve these families that I'm just super proud of. But just like as simple as transportation and supporting a
Do y'all
family.
offer transportation?
We don't,
Uh-huh.
but we are pretty familiar with like the city services
Uh-huh.
that some of our families can qualify for because of their needs. And so we're happy to try to get that city bus schedule.
Sounds like you're a
Um,
connector.
we're part of a group that the Henry Foundation kind of sponsors about just like medical care, medical access in Midland, not just
Mhm.
pediatrics, but across the board. And transportation is a big issue that they're seeing young to old is like just not being able to make their appointments because they don't have transportation. But when we can support earlier, it
Mhm.
just leads to a healthier community in the end.
Speaking on a personal level, I was diagnosed with dyslexia and dyscalculia.
Okay.
My mom's gonna correct me. I wanna say, like, 2nd grade.
Okay.
And my math skills did not develop after 2nd grade. Seriously,
Right.
and what's funny is I can speak to that because I was able to do a lot of different programs that
Mhm.
helped me through 504s and
Right.
IEP. Not,
Right.
I'm not really sure all of what that looked like from like a pediatric side
Sure.
as medical care, but I know as somebody who has a dyslexia, there's a lot of shame involved. So, and I know that dyslexics very much internalize that because we pass as whatever you want to think we are,
Right.
neuronormative or whatever, but it's something that you don't see because you're not reading what I'm writing,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And so how I can imagine with, thinking about the full child and looking at that child as a person who might be multifaceted in their needs. How are we addressing, I mean, like it sounds like you guys have other therapeutic options to help serve these
Mhm.
communities, populations, if we
Mhm.
want to get in the medical
Yeah.
terminology.
Yeah.
How are you guys doing that for dyslexic kids? Because there's not a lot of resources for children who have dyslexia.
Yeah. That's a good question. It your question made me think of a couple of other
Yeah, no,
things, and
please.
and we'll definitely go back to
Yeah.
dyslexia. But one really great thing about MCRC is that just besides just providing like the therapeutic intervention, we're really big on providing education to families. And so,
Ooh.
kind of that support that you were just mentioning,
Yes.
like starting with our infants, we have a class that's called Motor Mouth. And
I've heard about that.
yes.
That's right.
So we originally were looking for referrals like from the NICU. So any baby that went to the NICU, we would love for them to come to us, and we spend 4 weeks. It's a speech therapist, she's the mouth, and there's a physical therapist who's the motor part. And we talk about typical development from birth to about 15, 18 months so that a family knows what to expect. And then those therapists have 4 weeks that they get their eyes on those babies that were born premature so that we can determine, are they going to need like a therapy appointment? Do we need to pick them up for therapy? And it's all about educating families. And so, um, play is really what therapy is, but it's intentional play. So when you can teach how is tracking a toy therapeutic to your child, when you can teach them those things, then that's early intervention.
Can we
That's a
talk
leg
about
up.
that
It's
too?
all
Because
sure,
because
sure.
like my best friend, and godmother of my kids, Sarah, she's a speech pathologist by
Okay.
trade.
Yeah.
And I remember her telling me all the time that oftentimes parents don't understand
Mm-hmm.
that children learn best through play.
Mm-hmm.
Because Andrea Lancaster Jones, who's the executive director of the Boys and Girls Club,
Yes.
she says that as a teacher, when you're getting on to kids the most, it's because their hands aren't busy,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to set expectations for parents. I know that I could have benefited from that. Luckily, I had a teacher for
Yeah.
mom,
Yeah.
but there were times where she got frustrated
Right.
because I wasn't meeting,
Right.
KPIs or key
Sure.
performance
Yeah.
indicators or, the developmental milestones that I needed to hit because of my disabilities. So
Right.
I can imagine if you guys are intervening as early as right out of the NICU,
Mm-hmm.
that it would reduce so many barriers for the emotional development of that family.
Right.
So I can imagine parents are going to feel, and I'm not speaking for everyone, but there's so much emotional stress for parents that have children who have learning differences or physical differences
Yes.
or cognitive differences. And a lot of the times that can be internalized as shame, when there's nothing to be ashamed of.
Absolutely.
And I think if just through the grieving process of what a diagnosis could mean for a family,
Mhm.
eventually, hopefully, we have a support system that
Mhm.
provides a system where parents can then get to a point where they can educate others on their child. I'm really
Yeah.
big on encouraging those who have physical differences, emotional differences, whatever differences, to be involved within our community.
Yeah.
And because we have to understand that not everyone looks like us,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And the more representation we have of children who may have physical differences or whatever,
Yeah.
the more it becomes acceptable for these children to be a part of our community, which I think is
Mhm.
what is so essential for living within community,
You're
right?
exactly right. That motor mouth group, we never went into it. Our goals going into it were provide education, identify if babies need to be picked up for therapy, and they get in the door quick without having to wait on our list. What we found was that the benefit between the moms who were bringing their babies who were so scared that they had been in the NICU, or maybe they had other kids who were typical,
Mhm.
and they all of a sudden thought, wow, my life is going to look so different. But the bonds that the families make together is amazing. They talk about toys. We
Yeah.
always start the session out with highs and lows. And sometimes it has nothing to do with like the therapeutic activity, but
Yeah.
them just bonding. We have some other groups called AEP, SIP, and they're kind of geared toward the autistic population,
Yeah.
which a whole lot of education is important because it's such a huge spectrum.
It
Like
is.
you can't pick two people
Mm-mm.
that are exactly the same. And so
Nope.
that's a much longer group where the therapists really teach about the diagnosis, offer ways that you can help your child at home and be successful, and then just connecting with others. And that goes a long way. Those types of groups would not be paid for by an insurance company. So the fact that we don't charge for our services, like it's allowing us to do something that's so impactful for families to help change their lives that wouldn't be a reimbursable thing. Back to your dyslexia.
Dyslexia.
Yes. Um, we don't have a support group or a group that I can think of for dyslexia. The program that we use is called the Barton, and our tutors are really really good at it. It's like a multisensory program that
Yes.
it's real structured. There's a certain number of books that each child goes through. They use senses, like three senses. They
Uh-huh.
use touch, vision and hearing, and they use these tiles to move. Like, so you're familiar with it.
Well, it's very to give you perspective, I haven't really received therapy for my dyslexia
Okay.
because I'm a typical public school kid.
Right.
So like for me what that looked like is diagnostics, and then you go to a child psychologist, and then they
Right.
make you do the tests.
Right.
This was back in
Sure.
I don't know if the
Sure.
diagnostic criteria is what it was when I was growing up. But then like every 4 years you'd have to be reevaluated,
Yeah.
and like just in order to prove that you have a disability. And
Right.
quite frankly, it was very frustrating as a little kid because then the public school system would then say, well, it's your job to take responsibility to advocate for yourself as somebody who has a disability. Well, when you're 6 years old
Yeah.
or 8 years old,
Yeah.
you know how hard it is to go to your teacher and say, oh, yeah, by the way, I know that obviously there's no emotional
Sure.
awareness at that point,
Sure.
but here are my 504 modifications, which for people who don't know what 504s are, is it's a federally protected, right now,
Yeah.
federally protected documentation that says, here are the accommodations that you are federally protected, and you have to help me in these ways. And ideally, you're having conversations with your teachers. Well, then, it's up to that child to reinforce and request those modifications.
Yeah.
And they start as early as diagnostic, as early as you can, to try and incorporate that within the classroom. But the problem is it's dehumanizing because every 4
What
years
kid wants to?
yeah, no
or
kid.
like, yeah.
Yeah, no kid wants to go to their teacher and say, I'm different.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I cannot imagine the benefits of receiving tutoring like you guys have. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's the right
Well, and
terminology.
MISD does now, and it's the same process. There's still a evaluation or a test, like by a developmental pediatrician or a diagnostician to come up with the diagnosis. And MISD does have programs and intervention where they pull you from your class and you go work on that. And I think they're very successful.
That's wonderful.
Kids that come to us, sometimes they're MISD kids, or sometimes they're kids at private schools or homeschool where there is no intervention.
Yeah.
And so, we just happen to use the Barton, but I don't know enough about other, if it's working, if your intervention's working, I think that's great. But what I think is so great is that the families of these kids with dyslexia, they want to shout it from the rooftops. Like other
Really?
families,
I love
they like
that.
to share their progress, but it's the parents of the kids with dyslexia that they will like, can I talk to your ED? I'd really just like to share how good things are going. And I mean, I hear story after story about how the child had no self-esteem or really low self-esteem, would not
Mhm.
read in front of the class, did
Mhm.
not comprehend things that they were reading, were in the very lowest percentile
Mhm.
for their reading grade, to like a year later being in the like the 75th percentile of
Mhm.
reading, offering to read in front of the class, under asking for books for their birthdays and Christmas.
Oh, that's so
And it
sweet.
is really cool. We had a really fun, we had some underwriters that paid for all of our patients that wanted to go to a Rockhounds game this summer. And so we had like 500,
Oh my
we had like,
gosh.
yeah, we had a lot of people that took us up on it. And those dyslexia families, like they wanted to participate and they were loud
There's
and proud about it,
100%. And I
and they
think
wanna share it. Yeah, they just wanna share that with others.
that's very common amongst dyslexics, and I'm not trying to make this whole episode about
No,
dyslexia, but,
yeah.
it is very much an underserved population in the sense that there are so many people that just fall through the cracks, and
Yeah.
it's one of those disabilities. I feel like if you have any disability, it can really affect your self-esteem at some point in your life.
Mhm.
But what's really interesting is to be able to have such a community that is so willing to help such a small
Yeah.
population. I mean, I just feel like that's really admirable. And I think what's also really interesting is how creative your organization is with serving children. I mean, I know Hippotherapy is what y'all
Uh-huh,
call it. And
uh-huh.
then explain to me about that. And then explain to me about the aquatic therapy as
Okay.
well. Cause
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
that you guys just opened that.
Yeah, we did. So hippotherapy is therapy on horseback,
Hmm.
and we have trained horses that are trained to work with children that have all abilities. And
Wow.
so we don't use a saddle in hippotherapy. They just sit on a blanket, and
Hmm.
there's like a surcingle, so there's like handles.
Hmm.
And we use a blanket as opposed to a saddle because we change positions. So sometimes they're riding forward, sometimes they're riding sideways, backwards, but we can use the horse's movement to elicit different responses from children. And so, like when I got certified in hippotherapy 22 years ago, it really was speaking to like that highly spasticity, the tight tone kids,
Hmm.
like our cerebral palsy kids.
Right.
And so the movement of the horse was very rhythmical. Like they take the same even steps each time. And so sitting on a horse translates that really typical movement, which these kids don't have on their own because their brains don't allow them. And it helps create pathways in the brain. So they actually feel what shifting their weight from their right to their left feels like, because the horse is doing that for them.
Wow.
Yes, and then I'm sure you've sat on a horse, and when the horse moves, you respond because
Yeah.
you don't wanna fall down. And so, we get relaxation of tight muscles, we contract our core,
Hmm.
we can stretch out tight muscles because I mentioned this typical cerebral palsy child, like, has tight legs where they scissor. Well, when
Hmm.
you're sitting on a horse, they're separated and stretched out. And so, like, a hot
Wow.
pack helps you relax tight muscles. Well, your skin on a top of a warm animal, like, is same thing like a hot pack, and they
Wow.
stretch out. Well, like 5 years into my practice here in Midland, we started doing hippotherapy for all types of toned kids. So like a child with Down syndrome has
Uh-huh.
really low tone, and they kind of present floppy. Kids on the spectrum sometimes have
Low
lower
muscle
muscle
tone.
tone. And so what we were finding is that that same movement of the horse, which was rhythmical, natural, relaxing, also could be alerting for like the low tone child and
Wow.
help build strength. And so I just remember like thinking this, all that I learned about how the horse moves to relax muscle tone and to give normal movement, almost it's not the opposite, but it's very alerting for like the kids
Wow.
with the lower muscle tone. And so now, it could be 50% of your caseload is more of the high tone, and 50% could be more of the low tone.
Wow.
Yeah, hippotherapy is amazing. Speech therapy needs the normal movement also, A lot of times they're looking at breast support for
Mm.
sounds. Sometimes it's just motivating, and the child, you tell the horse stops and you say, "We're not going to walk again until you say the 4 R things that I want you to say." I've even seen a speech therapist brought they were working on feeding, and the child had some aversions to food, and they needed them to take a bite of the banana. And the child was sticking, like, "I'm not taking the bite. I'm not taking the bite." And the therapist was like, "We're not going till you take the bite." And they took the bite. And so,
Kids
yeah.
are so
So
funny.
it can be motivating.
I love that.
But yeah, it's a very the using the horse is very, very therapeutic. And then just for those kids that have been in and out of therapy for a
Mhm.
long time and they're kind of tired of it,
Mm.
riding the horse is just different. And it's sometimes, like, I've had several kids on the verge of walking, but not quite yet because of their balance, and put them in a couple of rounds of hippotherapy, and it just gets their balance right, and they just take off from there.
Kind of
So
it disorients the
vestibular, yeah,
yeah, the vestibular system,
yeah,
because the vestibular system, I mean that we can get into all that. I
yeah,
find that part very interesting.
uh-huh,
So talk to me about your aquatherapy, because I
yeah,
know RWA, which is a very incredible architect group
mhm.
here in West Texas, they were the ones that
They did
developed the pool,
ours.
right?
Yes,
So
they
tell
did
me, what do you
ours.
guys do?
We had a pool from 76 is when it was first built through 2020. So we
Mhm.
had a pool that gave us our money's worth, and
That's a long
it was
time.
fantastic. We had a couple leaks, we've done a couple repairs and revisions on it, but then in 20 it got a pretty bad crack that they felt like was irreparable and was going to start causing foundation problems to our building. So we went ahead and just closed the pool. Well, 20 was a terrible year to
Mhm.
try to do a capital campaign because of
Yeah.
COVID. So we waited a couple years, and COM was gracious enough to let us
That's
use some of their
awesome.
pool
Just
space.
down the street.
Yep, just around the corner for
That's
for
awesome.
several of our kids that we felt like aquatics was the best way to reach their goals.
And they have the STAR program too, which works with special needs children
Yes,
with
yes,
water safety. That's
yes,
wonderful.
yeah, they are great.
I
Um,
love Mr. Swindig. He's
yeah,
great.
yeah, we love COM. So anyways, we operated a couple of years with our kiddos going to COM, and our therapists would meet them there. And then when we felt like it was a good time to start fundraising again, we fundraised, and RWA helped design our pool, and we opened it last year. But I mean, you're probably will be able to explain this even better than
Hmm.
me, but the properties of the water can help us with therapy.
Yep.
So for some of those low tone kids that kind of don't know where they are in space, they
Mhm.
need what we call proprioception. They need to know where they are in space. Well, the water property gives them that sense of where they are in space.
Yes.
And sometimes the resistance of the water can be
Mhm.
used for strengthening,
Yep.
or it can be used to gain range of motion
Mhm.
depending on what movements you're doing. We keep our water really warm.
Me
We're like
too.
90 or above is
Yeah.
therapeutic for us.
Mhm.
What?
Well, so technically, the American Red Cross says that any water that's below 90 degrees is unsuitable for children.
Okay. Okay.
It outside,
Yeah.
because of, especially with wind
Sure.
conditions.
Yeah.
But long story short, water should never be below 90
Okay.
degrees. But I mean, that in itself is very difficult because of the financials. There's so many public pools that, I mean, I know that there's one organization in East Texas, they use a public pool and they can't control the water temperature.
Yeah.
So it's a blessing that you guys are
Right.
able to keep it that warm.
Right.
We keep our pool at 90 to 95,
Yeah.
and it's just so conducive for a couple of different reasons. I have a really big passion for children who are neurodiverse.
Okay.
Probably because as a
Yeah.
dyslexics tend not to overgeneralize. Dyslexics tend to be top-down thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
So I am able to think with a child who has neurodiversity, think autistic, maybe some cognitive differences, and I'm able to think, okay, what can this child do?
Right.
And then we go down,
Sure.
right?
Okay.
So it's all about accommodations.
Yeah.
And I think the water offers that because we all inherently have natural buoyancy.
Right.
But I've also worked with a couple of y'all's patients who have had who have
Yeah.
cerebral palsy. One of them is one of my favorite students, and I won't name names because of HIPAA, but
Sure.
he came to me, and much like with that child not wanting to eat the banana,
Uh-huh.
he would look at me and be like, I'm not doing this. He was nonverbal.
Yeah.
Nonverbal, and had very low muscle tone.
Okay.
His limbs were very crunched in.
Hi.
And when
Okay.
I've been working with him now for 6 years, and he can swim 25 yards
Wow.
freestyle. And I think he can do backstroke, is where we finished this year.
It's awesome.
And he can float for a minute straight. He can roll on his back, float for a minute.
Awesome.
And a lot of it, I think oftentimes organizations, I know hospitals tend to be very clinical.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to dismiss because they're looking for KPIs, right?
Yeah.
Because of insurance.
Yeah.
You were saying at the initial part of your career, it's hard to justify therapy
Right.
sometimes in the hospital setting because of insurance.
Yeah.
In an organization such as yours, you are able to look at the child as a full child
Right.
and look at them from different facets of who they are, because truly that's how we all are, right?
Yeah.
The water is able to do that and make things that maybe you didn't even know
Right.
were a thing. And I've
Yeah.
worked with a couple, actually several of your staff on the PT side, the OT side,
Uh-huh.
speech therapy side, and like I've worked with their care team to figure out how can we get this kid
Yeah.
to like float, because
Right.
guess what? It helps them out
Yeah, for sure.
with speech, OT, PT.
Right.
So for y'all to, but that therapy in water is different than what we're doing.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
it's all about creating the culture of collaboration. And I think what's important as your role is you've definitely, I know obviously your whole team and your board are
Mhm.
fostering that within our community. Are there any other organizations, you were talking about the Henry Foundation, that help create this collaborative environment to help serve your patients? Loaded question, I know.
Yeah. Well, we get support from so many local foundations, so they certainly are our partner in our mission. We have yeah.
MISD seems to probably work with you very
Yeah,
closely.
we have a collaboration with Bynum School and Spectrum of Solutions for a camp that we do
Y'all have a
at
camp,
spring.
a We of the World?
Yeah,
Is that
We
what
Are
it's
the
called?
World, yeah.
So tell me about that for somebody who doesn't know.
Yeah. So we have camp at Christmas, spring break, and summer. It's just a day at Christmas and spring break, but in the summer it's a full week long camp. And I mean, we're talking it's all the camp activities, and they do not change. The activity is chosen because it's a fun camp activity. We just know how to make adaptations so that everybody can participate. But it's the kids from Bynum that go to school are invited, kids from MCRC are invited, and kids that go to Spectrum of Solution are invited. And we have a camp director who is fantastic. She has the best background. She is a behavioral therapist by trade. But she's just really great at activities and including everyone. The child with the disability and their sibling are invited.
Oh, wait, that's so nice. So they don't feel like they're, they
Yes.
don't know. Let's talk about that too, because there's caregiver fatigue.
Sure.
There's also sibling fatigue. I know that there was a statistic that was going around back when autism really got a lot of press, back I think the early 2000s, where they were saying that families who have disabilities, including children on the spectrum, are so much at higher risk for having divorces or familial, stress. I can imagine that having a sibling who might have a disability could be very difficult. So it's nice that y'all have respite for if it's just going to camp for a day.
Right.
Like that must be such uplifting for the whole family.
Yeah, and at Christmas, that camp, a lot of the families are encouraged, like, go Christmas shopping, go to dinner, do something that you can do to prepare for the holidays since your kids are taken care of, so to speak.
So like the parents are able to like drop off their kids.
Yeah, they drop their
that's
kids
so
off.
nice.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Wow,
Yeah,
especially for a child who might be on a trach or
sure.
like, might have like a more of a medical complex struggle. It must be very nice to be able to have that break, because I'm sure they're few and far
Right.
between, huh?
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, the reason why we do this podcast is so that parents know what's accessible here.
Mhm.
It sounds like you guys really have a lot of support from the community. What are some things that, what are some needs that y'all need currently? Like, I'm sure there are so many people that are going to want to reach out and support y'all's organization.
Yeah.
How can they help you right now? Are there any capital campaigns that they can contribute
We
to?
don't have a capital campaign,
Mhm.
but we always accept donations. So at our website, www.midlandchildrens.org, there's a donate now button in the top right hand corner. It's super easy. No gift is too small, like $5 to up. We love to grow our support, and really, no amount is too small. We have typically we have a QR code at MCRC that has items that are like on Amazon that, maybe we need tissues, or maybe the OTs have a new toy picked out. That's ways that you can support us. Volunteering is a great way. You can call MCRC and ask to speak to someone about volunteering. That's always helpful to us. We love to give tours, even just to be a friend of MCRC, to be able to share, what we do with
Mhm.
others. There's not many places in town that do pediatric therapy.
Mhm.
We're one of the few, and the fact that we don't bill for our services is really huge.
Wow.
Um, it doesn't mean that therapy's free. I mean,
Yeah.
we've talked about riding horses. We talked about a state of the
Can't
art pool.
imagine the
We've talked
expense.
about the therapists who have
Yeah.
doctorates. I mean, we're
Mhm.
talking that it's a great staff with a lot of knowledge, and they want paychecks
Yeah,
at
I
the
can
end.
imagine,
Yeah.
like, I know that when we were talking to Stephen Bowerman, I'm actually going on a hospital tour.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
Now it's funny when you reach out to people, they start to being like, "Okay, well, you have to do this, this,
Yeah.
this, because we want you to know about it." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sign me up for it all." But one of the things that Stephen Bowerman was saying is like, it's very rare that you get people that come to you and say, I want to be here and I want to give back to our community. I know the pediatric neurologist, we were talking about him because he's just incredible, was one of those people. I know
Mhm.
that there's plenty of speech pathologists and OTs and whatever would love to work with MCRC, but you
Mhm.
really have to keep it competitive so that we
Yeah,
can keep those high quality
exactly.
individuals here. So I'm sure I'd be remiss to say that, it's important to maintain that. So
Right.
I can imagine the expense involved.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
And so just operational support by donations
Mhm.
means so much to us, and sharing what we do with others.
Mhm.
I can think of just a handful of people that are just great relationships now that stemmed from someone saying, "Hey, you should call Crystal," or "I want you to," or come to me and say, "Hey, I want you to call my friend, have them come by and give them a tour." And just so many relationships start that way. We're 100% funded by our
It's
community.
awesome.
The foundations in town are awesome. We've been around since like 1956, and
That's
so
amazing.
isn't it? Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, we've been around since 1956, so we have partnered with a lot of not only organizations, but corporations, foundations, and individuals, because so many people in our community believe in what we do, and want to help the children that need our help. It's how we were started. We were started by a group of ladies called the Children's Service League. They had a heart for babies at the time, and they made layettes and provided vaccine clinics for them. And in
That's so
providing
cool.
those vaccine clinics, they found there were some kids in Midland that had cerebral palsy. And these ladies were like, "What do kids with CP need?" And they researched way before there was Google, like in the 50s.
Yep.
These
Going to the
women,
library.
yep, they knew what to do, and they found they need physical therapy, they need speech therapy. They raised money and they hired their own PT.
Wow.
And this many years later, we're operating under the same premise,
That's
because
amazing.
isn't it awesome?
Gosh.
Because that group of ladies was like, "This is Midland needs this for the families that live here." And when
Wow.
the kiddos are taken care of, then the families, they can take care of their other needs. So
I always
it's
tell people, like, if you ever want anything done, ask a parent.
yeah,
Mom
yeah,
or mom or dad,
true.
because there's a lot of dads, like, we were talking to Jeff Beard, who is a dad, and he got together with a bunch of guys at Crown Quest where he works, and they said, "What do we wanna build for our kids?"
Right.
And I mean, not to put anybody else down if they don't have kids, but
Uh-huh.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, they always say, "Give if you want something done, give it to a busy person,"
Yeah.
and who's more busy than a
Right.
parent? So,
True.
I think that's wonderful. Just to end
Yeah.
our conversation, what gives you hope for the future of Midland? Like, what makes you wanna be here, and what makes you think that inspires you for the next future
Yeah.
generation of Midland?
I mean, I get to be a part of a lot of conversations
Mhm.
with a lot of nonprofits, and I'm so hopeful. I think there's people in Midland that see problems are going to be anywhere,
Yeah.
whether it's Midland or somewhere else, but people in Midland want what's best for people in Midland, and
Mhm.
they figure out ways. And there's so many really great organizations, profit and nonprofit,
Mm.
that want that quality of life for people in Midland. I mean, our kids are all, raised. Our baby just graduated last year and is at college, but all three of our kids, my husband and I, were dragging our feet to come back to Midland. All three of our kids, like, they want to make Midland their home.
That's so
So I mean,
cool.
they were part of the public school system, born and raised here, and have seen all the, the really tough things that Midland has been through, and they still like love Midland. And I know a lot of their friends, have plans to come back too. So I mean, I am really hopeful about Midland. It was a great place to live.
I always tell people it's a small town. I've grown up in big cities in Midland. I
Mhm.
mean, big cities in Texas. First 8 years of my life in Houston,
Oh
then
yeah.
Austin. I went to school
Yeah.
in Dallas. Like, I've seen it all, I feel like,
Right.
or at least have a bit okay
Right.
understanding. This is my favorite place I've ever lived
Yeah.
because it's the right pace of life
Yeah.
to slow down enough to actually get to know people.
Makes sense.
And the people are what make our community
Very
what it
true.
is. And I can imagine if I'm somebody who's getting transferred from Oxy to here,
Mhm.
I can imagine that it might be kind of intimidating, that level of intimacy.
Right.
But I ask for people to have an open mind because just like what you say, people get referrals like,
Yeah.
hey, Crystal, can you talk
Yeah.
to my friend? That's how life
Yeah.
works here,
Right.
is actually putting yourself out there, even if it just means that you're a little uncomfortable just for a second.
Sure.
People will grab onto you and make you feel like you're a part of our community pretty quickly.
Yeah. I
Wonderful.
totally agree.
Well, thanks for
Yeah.
coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully we'll in the next couple of weeks we'll touch base and see what if there's anything we can do to promote for y'all. So if there's any special programs, we'd love to share that with our community. But I'm
Awesome.
very thankful that you came.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
so
me.
much.
Yeah.
All right. Catch you next time. Bye.